The smell of burnt diesel and reheated coffee hit my nostrils as I pulled my dark blue Peterbilt into that lost-in-the-middle-of-Texas truck stop. 2 in the morning on some random Tuesday. Just another dot on the infinite line my existence had become. Marcus Thompson, 38 years old. 8 years driving these American roads like they were the only companions I could stand. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this. My life had narrowed down to this: miles of asphalt, mandatory rest stops, and the constant hum of the engine lulling me to sleep every night. Not that I was complaining. After the divorce, this mechanical routine had become my shield against anything that could hurt me again. Sarah used to scream that I didn't belong anywhere, and maybe she was right. But out here, between the interstates, I'd found my peace. Or at least that's what I believed until that morning. I climbed out of the cab, stretching muscles tense from long hours behind the wheel, watching the typical overnight truck stop hustle. Some seasoned drivers were sleeping in their cabs. Others walked the convenience store aisles looking for a bite or just to break the monotony. Neon lights flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows on the asphalt, wet with the morning dew. That's when my eyes caught something different. Leaning against a red Kenworth, a man was drinking coffee from a disposable cup, gazing at the starry sky. There was something about his posture that immediately caught my eye. A quiet confidence that contrasted with the typical reserve of truckers during these casual encounters. Dark hair with streaks of gray at the temples, medium height, broad shoulders under a blue and white plaid shirt. When he noticed my gaze, he turned his face towards me. That's when everything changed. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check the link in the description right now. Deep brown eyes met mine directly, without that nervous haste common among strangers. A subtle smile curved his lips, followed by a deliberate wink that made my heart race in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just a casual greeting. There was something more in that gesture, an intention that crossed the space between us like an electric current. I felt my breath hitch for a second. In 8 years on the road, thousands of casual encounters at places like this, I'd never felt this strange sensation in my chest. A mix of curiosity, nervousness, and something I couldn't quite name. I forced myself to look away and walk towards the fuel pump, but I could feel him still watching me. Every move I made seemed amplified under that attentive gaze. As the tank filled, I pretended to check the tires, but I was really trying to figure out what had happened in those few seconds of eye contact. I finished fueling up and headed into the convenience store, desperately needing a strong coffee to keep my mind occupied. The man from the red Kenworth had already gone in ahead of me and was in the snack aisle, studying the options with a concentrated expression that made me smile involuntarily. "Hard to choose when everything tastes like cardboard, isn't it?" I commented, approaching without thinking too much about the consequences. He chuckled, a genuine laugh that echoed through the empty aisle. "Vincent Rodriguez," he said, extending a hand. "And you're absolutely right about the cardboard. Marcus Thompson." I shook his hand, immediately noticing the firm grip and the warmth of his skin. "At least the coffee still saves the day." "Ah, the coffee." Vincent shook his head with an ironic smile. "I've had better in abandoned workshops." We walked together to the coffee machine, and I was surprised by how naturally the conversation flowed. Vincent had this rare ability to make even the most mundane comments seem interesting. While we waited for our coffees, he asked about my route. "Leaving Houston, heading to Denver. Industrial equipment load," I replied automatically, but then added something I rarely shared. "Do you know these Colorado roads?" "First time I'm doing this route." "I know them well," Vincent nodded, picking up his coffee cup. "Incredible landscapes. Are you going through Route 70? There's a stretch in the mountains that's breathtaking." There was genuine enthusiasm in his voice when he spoke about the roads, as if every mile was a personal discovery. It was refreshing to find someone who saw the profession through different eyes than mine. For me, driving had become a form of escape. For him, it seemed to be a constant adventure. "And you? Where are you headed?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Phoenix. Transporting automotive parts." Vincent took a sip of coffee and grimaced. "You were right about the cardboard taste." We laughed together, and I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. There was something contagious about his energy, a vitality that contrasted with my natural tendency towards isolation. We decided to leave the stuffy atmosphere of the store and walk to a small overlook near the truck stop. The early morning was clear, with a sky full of stars that we rarely get to see in big cities. The fresh Texas night air carried the characteristic smell of dry vegetation and the distant aroma of barbecues that still lingered from some nearby house. "You know," Vincent said, leaning on the wooden fence that marked the overlook. One of the things I like most about this job is being able to see the sky like this. No light pollution, no buildings getting in the way. I looked up, trying to see through his eyes. I never really stopped to observe, I admitted. Usually, I just want to get to my destination and find a place to sleep. How long have you been on the road? Vincent asked me, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice, not just conversation to fill the silence. 8 years, I replied, surprising myself with my own honesty. I started after some personal life changes. Vincent nodded understandingly, without pressing for more details. I get it. Sometimes the road is the best place to process things. We remained silent for a few minutes, watching the stars. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of quiet you share with someone who understands your need not to fill every second with words. Vincent radiated a calmness I didn't know I needed. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Sure. You seem like someone who's always getting ready to leave. Even when you're stopped, it's like you're already mentally at the next stop." His observation caught me off guard. It was eerily accurate. "How did you—" "I recognize it because I used to be like that too," Vincent interrupted softly. "Always ready to run before things got too complicated." "And what changed?" I asked, genuinely interested. Vincent smiled, but there was a melancholy in his eyes. "I learned that running away doesn't solve problems. It just postpones them. And sometimes, when you stop running, you find things worth keeping." His words echoed in my mind in a way that made me uncomfortable. Not because I disagreed, but because they touched on truths I had carefully avoided facing. We walked back slowly to our trucks, and I was surprised to wish the conversation wouldn't end. Vincent had a unique way of asking questions that forced me to think, without making me feel invaded. It was like talking to someone who genuinely wanted to know Marcus Thompson, not just pass the time until the next destination. "What kind of music do you listen to on trips?" he asked as we walked. "Classic country, mostly. Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, Merle Haggard." I listed, expecting the typical comment about old people's music. "Excellent taste," Vincent said with genuine approval. "Hank Williams Sr. is my favorite. There's something about the brutal honesty of those lyrics that perfectly matches the road." Another unexpected connection. We spent the next few minutes discussing our favorite driving songs, swapping stories about shows we'd seen, and artists we'd like to see live. Vincent even knew the less famous albums of my favorite singers, showing a knowledge that went beyond casual. When we reached our trucks, I realized we'd been talking for almost 2 hours. Time had flown by in a way it hadn't for years. Usually, I timed my social interactions, always eager to return to the solitude of the cab. "Marcus," Vincent said, stopping beside my Peterbilt, "it was really good talking to you. It's not often I meet someone who truly understands this life." "I enjoyed it too," I admitted, and it was true. Vincent hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "You know, our routes aren't that different. Maybe we'll run into each other again at a truck stop somewhere." There was something in his voice that suggested this encounter hadn't been casual for him either. A subtle expectation, almost imperceptible, but one I could pick up on. "That'd be cool," I replied, and I really meant it. We said goodbye with a handshake that lasted a few seconds longer than social protocol required. When I climbed into my truck's cab, Vincent was still standing beside his Kenworth, watching me with that subtle smile that had caught my attention from the first moment. I started the engine and began to pull away from the truck stop, but I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation we'd had. Vincent had awakened something in me that I had carefully kept dormant, a genuine curiosity about another person, a desire for connection that went beyond the superficial interactions I had grown accustomed to accepting. As I drove down the dark highway towards Colorado, my mind kept returning to those brown eyes and the strange feeling I'd had when he winked at me. There was something different about that man, something that stirred an uneasiness I didn't know how to process. Miles passed, but the feeling remained. For the first time in years, I was genuinely curious to know more about someone. Vincent Rodriguez had broken the mechanical routine of my existence in just a few hours, planting seeds of questions I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The road ahead stretched infinitely as always, but something had changed. It was no longer just a path to the next destination. Now it carried the possibility of new encounters, new conversations, perhaps even a new perspective on what it truly meant to belong somewhere. But then a familiar feeling began to form in my chest. That anxiety that accompanied any possibility of a deeper connection. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. "You don't belong anywhere, Marcus. You never will." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to push away the thoughts that threatened my carefully constructed peace. Vincent seemed different, but I had learned the hard way that people always disappoint. It was better to keep things simple, superficial, safe. Even so, I couldn't stop wondering if I really would run into Vincent again on some road. And even more disturbing, I realized a part of me was hoping it would happen. The 3 weeks had passed since that encounter at the Texas truck stop, and I couldn't get Vincent Rodriguez out of my head. I tried to convince myself it was just casual curiosity, but the truth was more complicated. Every truck stop I pulled into, every red Kenworth I spotted on the road made my heart race for a few seconds before the inevitable disappointment. I was hauling a load of electronic equipment from Atlanta to Las Vegas when fate decided to intervene again. I stopped at a truck stop on the New Mexico-Arizona border, one of those places forgotten by time where the only company is cacti and the desert wind. It was early afternoon. The sun mercilessly beat down on the asphalt, creating heat waves that distorted the landscape. And there he was. Vincent was checking his Kenworth's tires, crouched near the rear wheel. Even from a distance, even after 3 weeks, I recognized him instantly. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt that strange sensation in my stomach, a mix of nervousness and anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. I parked a few spaces ahead, trying to seem casual, but my hands trembled slightly as I turned off the engine. Vincent looked up when he heard my Peterbilt, and our eyes met through the windshield. The smile that spread across his face was genuine, warm, as if he too had been waiting for this moment. "Marcus Thompson," he said, approaching, extending his hand with that familiar firmness. "What a pleasant coincidence." "Vincent," I replied, shaking his hand and noticing that the touch lasted a few seconds longer than necessary. "Looks like our routes really do cross paths. Or maybe the universe is trying to tell us something," he said with an enigmatic smile that made my stomach flutter. We spent the whole afternoon together, first having coffee at the truck stop's attached restaurant, then walking around the rocky desert surroundings while our trucks rested under the scarce shade of some dried-up trees. Vincent talked about his last trip, about the interesting people he'd met, about small towns he'd discovered along the way. There was a contagious passion in the way he saw the world. Where I saw only mandatory rest stops, he saw opportunities for discovery. Where I saw necessary solitude, he saw freedom to explore. His perspective was slowly changing mine, forcing me to question why I had chosen to see life so limitedly. "You know," Vincent said as we watched the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and red, "you seem less tense than the last time we met." He was right. There was something about his presence that both calmed and stirred me. "Maybe it's the desert effect," I joked, but I knew it was more than that. "Or maybe it's the good company effect," Vincent replied, looking directly into my eyes. There was something different in the air between us this time. A subtle tension, an electricity that hadn't existed in our first encounter. Each gaze lasted a few seconds longer. Each comment seemed to carry a double meaning. Each moment of silence was charged with unspoken possibilities. When it was time to leave, we both hesitated near our trucks. The sun had completely set, leaving the desert bathed in the silver light of the full moon. Vincent leaned against the side of my Peterbilt, closer than he had been before. "Marcus," he said, his voice lower, more intimate than usual. "Can I tell you something?" I nodded, feeling my breath quicken. "When I saw you at that first truck stop in Texas," Vincent continued, his eyes fixed on mine, "I really wanted to kiss you." The words dropped between us like a confession that changed everything. My heart stopped for a second before pounding violently. I felt a wave of heat rush up my neck, my mouth went dry, and all the defenses I had built over years began to tremble. "Vincent," I started, but I didn't know how to continue. "I know it might seem strange," he said quickly. "Two guys on the road, the life we lead, but there's something between us that I can't ignore." I looked into those brown eyes that gazed at me with an intensity that left me vulnerable and exposed. All my life I had run from moments like this, from confessions that demanded a response, from situations that could change everything. But this time, something was different. Instead of retreating, instead of finding an excuse to leave, I moved closer. I closed the small distance that still existed between us until I could feel the warmth of his body, until I could see the small lines around his eyes, until I could feel his slightly accelerated breathing. "Then why don't you?" I whispered, surprising myself with my own courage. Vincent smiled, a mix of desire and tenderness that made my whole world rearrange itself. His hands found my face, rough fingers caressing my beard with a delicacy that contrasted with the evident strength in his working hands. "Because," he said, bringing his face closer to mine. When I do that, it's gonna mean you're not just someone I met on the road anymore. What if I don't want to be just someone you met on the road? I asked, my voice hoarse with emotion. The answer came in the form of warm lips pressing against mine. The kiss started soft, hesitant, as if we were both testing unknown waters. But it quickly intensified, years of loneliness and defenses crumbling under the pressure of a need I didn't even know existed. His hands tangled in my hair as I pressed him against the side of the truck. He tasted like a mix of coffee and something indefinably masculine that made my head spin. Every movement of our lips was a discovery, every touch a revelation about parts of myself I had carefully kept buried. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. Vincent rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, a soft smile curving his lips. "My cab or yours?" he asked, his voice rough with desire. I didn't hesitate. "Mine." We climbed into the cab of my Peterbilt, and the space that for years had been my solitary refuge suddenly felt small and charged with possibilities. Vincent closed the curtain that separated the cab from the outside world, while I turned on only the soft dashboard light, creating an intimate and welcoming atmosphere. We sat on the narrow bed, face to face, and for a moment just looked at each other. There was something sacred in that instant. Two men who had spent years avoiding deep connections, finally allowing themselves to be vulnerable. "Are you sure about this?" Vincent asked, his hand finding mine. "For the first time in a long time," I replied, intertwining our fingers. "I'm sure about something." Vincent leaned in and kissed me again, this time with an urgency that mirrored my own. His hands explored my chest under my shirt, fingers tracing the contours of muscles developed by years of physical labor. I felt an electricity run through my skin where he touched, as if my body was waking up from a deep sleep. I returned his caresses, discovering the texture of his skin, the warmth that radiated from his body, the small sounds of pleasure that escaped his lips. Vincent had a way of touching that was both reverent and possessive, as if he was memorizing every inch of me. Our clothes gradually disappeared, revealing bodies shaped by hard work and life on the road. Vincent had small scars on his arms and chest, marks of a life lived intensely, and I found myself tracing each of them with my fingers and lips. When we finally joined completely, it was as if two puzzle pieces found their perfect fit. Vincent moved over me with a precision that spoke of experience and care, every movement calculated to maximize both our pleasure. I lost myself in the sensations, the weight of his body on mine, the rising rhythm of our movements, the sound of our mingled breaths in the confined space of the cab. The climax arrived like a storm, intense, overwhelming, leaving us both breathless and trembling. Vincent collapsed on top of me, his chest rising and falling rapidly, sweat mixing our scents into something uniquely ours. "Damn," he murmured against my neck, his breathing still ragged. "Yeah," I agreed, unable to form more elaborate thoughts. We remained entwined for a long time, neither of us wanting to break the magic of the moment. Vincent traced abstract patterns on my chest with his fingers, while I caressed his graying hair. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was filled with a mutual understanding that bypassed words. Eventually, Vincent lifted his head to look at me. "Marcus," he said softly, "does this change anything for you?" I thought about the question, really thought about it. For years, I had avoided any situation that could alter the status quo of my carefully controlled existence. But looking at Vincent, still feeling the warmth of his body against mine, I realized that it not only changed something, it changed everything. "It does," I admitted. "And for the first time, I'm not afraid of the changes." Vincent smiled, that warm smile that had captivated my attention from the first moment. "Good," he said, "because I was thinking, our routes don't have to be so different." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time we stop leaving our encounters to chance." Vincent propped himself up on his elbow, looking at me seriously. "How about we coordinate our loads? Travel together when possible?" The suggestion should have triggered all my flight instincts. It should have made me remember all the reasons why I had chosen the solitude of the road, but none of that happened. "Are you suggesting we become road partners?" I asked. "I'm suggesting we stop wasting time pretending this encounter was casual," Vincent replied. "I'm suggesting we explore where this could lead." I looked at the man who had entered my life twice now, disturbing my carefully constructed peace and offering something I didn't even know I wanted. Vincent wasn't asking for eternal promises or dramatic changes. He was simply suggesting that we stop fighting against something that clearly wanted to happen. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's give it a shot." The smile that lit up his face was like the sunrise after a long night. Vincent leaned in and kissed me again. A soft kiss, full of promises. That night we fell asleep entwined in my narrow bed, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream of empty roads and solitary destinations. I dreamed of possibilities, of shared roots, of the revolutionary idea that maybe belonging somewhere wasn't about geography, but about finding someone to share the journey with. 3 months had passed since that transformative night in the desert, and my life had changed in ways I never imagined possible. Vincent and I had managed to coordinate our routes with a precision that bordered on miraculous. Or perhaps it was just the determination of two men who had finally found something worth fighting to keep. We traveled together whenever possible, keeping constant contact via radio when our loads took us on different paths. The cab that for years had been my solitary refuge now pulsed with conversations, laughter, and an intimacy that grew with every mile traveled. Vincent had brought new music to my collection, books for us to read during mandatory stops, and most importantly, a completely different perspective on what it meant to live. He showed me small towns I had driven through dozens of times without really seeing, hidden restaurants that served the best homemade food around, overlooks where the sunset took on colors I had never noticed before. Vincent had a knack for turning routine into adventure, for finding beauty in places I considered just mandatory stops. But more important than the external changes was the transformation I felt within myself. The walls I had built around my heart didn't disappear overnight, but Vincent had found all the cracks and was patiently widening each of them with his constant and loving presence. It was late afternoon on a Friday when we arrived in the coastal city of Monterey, California. Our loads had been delivered earlier, and we had an entire weekend free before our next commitments, a rarity in our profession that we decided to make the most of. "How about we walk to the beach?" Vincent suggested as we parked our trucks in the lot of a beachfront motel. "It's been a while since I've seen the ocean up close." I agreed, and minutes later we were walking on the soft sand towards the waterline. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky in golden and pink hues that reflected on the undulating surface of the sea. The sea breeze carried the characteristic salty smell, and the rhythmic sound of the waves created a perfect soundtrack for our thoughts. Vincent walked a few meters ahead, occasionally stopping to collect interesting shells or simply to observe the vastness of the ocean. There was a serenity in his movements that made me realize how much he had changed my perception of being present in the moment, of truly experiencing a place instead of simply passing through it. "Marcus," he said, turning to me with a thoughtful expression, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Have you ever thought about, I don't know, having a home base? A place to always come back to after trips?" The question caught me off guard. For years, the idea of any kind of permanence terrified me. After the divorce, I had embraced the nomadic life as a way to never again feel trapped or vulnerable to the changes other people could impose on my existence. "Never seriously thought about it," I admitted. "Why?" Vincent stopped walking and looked at the landscape around us. "Look at this place. The tranquility, the beauty. Imagine having a house here by the sea, a place to rest between trips, to have something that's really ours." The word ours echoed in my mind in a way that should have scared me, but it didn't. Instead, I felt a genuine curiosity about this possibility Vincent was painting. "Are you serious?" I asked. "Completely serious." Vincent turned to face me, his brown eyes reflecting the golden light of the sunset. "I'm not talking about abandoning the road. I know this profession is in our blood, but having a home base, a place that's our home." I watched his face as he spoke, noting the cautious hope in his expression. Vincent was offering me something I had never thought possible. Not just a relationship, but a shared life, a future we could build together. "A house by the sea," I murmured, testing the words. "I never thought that could interest me." "And now?" Vincent asked softly. I looked at the ocean, at the waves that came and went in an eternal rhythm, and realized that my answer was already formed before I even had time to analyze it completely. "Now," I said, taking his hand, "I think it might be exactly what I need." The smile that lit up Vincent's face was like the sun rising after the longest storm of my life. He intertwined our fingers and pulled me closer, kissing me right there on the beach, with the sound of the waves as a witness to our decision to build something lasting together. We spent the rest of the night walking along the beach, making plans that ranged from practical to fantastical. Vincent talked about types of houses he'd like. I contributed with considerations about logistics and location. It was surprising how naturally we could visualize a shared life, as if this possibility had always existed, just waiting for the right moment to manifest itself. When we returned to the motel, Our conversation continued on the room's balcony, with Vincent pointing to different spots on the coast and imagining what it would be like to wake up to that view every day. There was a contagious excitement in his voice that made me see possibilities where before I only saw limitations. "You know what else excites me about this idea?" Vincent said, leaning on the balcony railing. "What?" "The possibility of having something that's truly ours. Not a temporary place, not a mandatory stop, but a home we choose and build together." His words touched something deep inside me. For years, I had convinced myself that I didn't need roots, that the freedom of the road was enough. But Vincent was showing me that it was possible to have both, to keep the profession we loved and still have a safe harbor to always return to. "Marcus," he said, turning to face me, "I know this might seem too fast, too intense. If you need time to think—" "I don't," I interrupted, surprising myself with the certainty in my own voice. "For 8 years I used the road as a way to escape commitments and responsibilities. But you showed me that it's possible to use the road as a path to build something, not to destroy." Vincent moved closer, his hands finding my face with that familiar tenderness that always disarms me completely. "So, you're saying yes? That we're going to do this together?" "I'm saying yes," I confirmed, and for the first time in years, I felt I was making a decision that came from the heart, not from fear. 6 months later, we were signing the papers for a small but charming house just 2 blocks from Monterey Beach. Vincent had found the property during one of his solo trips, and when he showed me the photos via message, I knew immediately it was perfect for us. The house had 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen with windows overlooking a small but well-kept garden, and a covered porch from where we could see the ocean between the treetops. It wasn't luxurious, but it had something I had never experienced before, the feeling of a true home. We continued as truckers, keeping our passion for the road, but now with a completely different purpose. We were no longer running from something. We were building a life together, one trip at a time. Vincent was right about having a home base. Returning to that house after weeks on the road became one of the greatest pleasures of my life. Waking up to the distant sound of the waves, having breakfast on the porch while planning our next route, sharing household chores and the responsibilities of a shared life, all of it brought a sense of completeness I never imagined possible. My ex-wife used to say I didn't belong anywhere, and for years I believed she was right. But Vincent showed me that belonging somewhere isn't about geography or physical structures. It's about finding someone with whom you can build a sense of home, no matter where you are. Today, as I write this story on our porch, I can hear Vincent in the kitchen preparing dinner and humming a country song that was playing on the radio during our last trip. In a few hours, we'll go for a walk on the beach, as we do every night when we're home. Tomorrow, we'll set off on another journey, him heading to Portland, me to San Francisco. But now I know that in a week we'll be back here, sharing stories of our individual adventures. The road taught me about freedom, but Vincent taught me about love. The combination of the 2 lessons created a life that surpasses any expectation I could have had about what it meant to be truly happy. If you've made it this far into the story, it's because you also believe in the power of unexpected encounters and our ability to transform our lives when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Leave a like if this story touched your heart in any way, and subscribe to the channel to follow more stories about human connections that change everything. Sometimes, the person who will transform your life is waiting at the next gas station, around the next bend in the road. In the next moment, you decide to open your heart to possibilities you never imagined. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check the link in the description right now. Life is a journey, but the best journeys are those we share with someone special. See you on the next road, folks. And remember, we never know what unexpected encounters destiny has in store for us.